geared towards you, and it's geared towards what you're trying to accomplish, and it basically puts people in the position where they are, whether or not they want to, whether or not they're interested, whether or not you're interested, they're in a position where they feel used instead of useful, right? And what I started to think about was,
hey, I'm Pam Pryor, and this is the Cash Flow Podcast. We're going to talk about everything related to money in your business. Without further ado, let's hop right in. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Cash Flow. This is a very unique one of our Know Your Map segments that I'm so excited about. This is where, if you remember, we celebrate the relationships in business, the ones that shape our successes, help us learn from our failures, kind of everybody from mentors to those unexpected surprises in the people that we meet on our entrepreneurial path. And today, we're going to talk to one of my unexpected surprises who has been here kind of feeling like a net to me, or a rock that I can go to and look at whenever I need to remember that we're not here alone. So I want to introduce you to Michael Roderick. He's the CEO of Small Pond Enterprises. It's a company that helps thoughtful givers, a lot of our listeners, correct, become thought leaders, helping make their brands referable, their messaging memorable, and mostly their ideas unforgettable, so they stick in the minds of the people they're working to attract. He's also the host of the podcast Access to Anyone, and we're going to drill in on this because he shows you on that podcast, which you all ought to listen to, that how you can get to know anyone you want to in business and actually in life using some time-tested relationship-based principles. And I want to dig in on that term with him. His unique methodology comes from his own experience of going from being a high school English teacher to something I didn't know, a Broadway producer in under 2 years. So he uses Broadway-informed branding techniques to help his clients find their innovative framework. And he creates offers where they can get paid for their brands. So, Michael, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. My very first question, what Broadway shows did you produce?
yeah, so I was on American Idiot, which was the Green Day musical
Yeah.
that was done. I also worked on a show called The Scottsboro Boys, which was it was one of the last shows that Kander and Ebb, who wrote Cabaret, it was one of the last
Oh,
ones
yeah,
that
yeah,
they
yeah. Was it a
that they
musical?
developed with. Yes, it was a musical with Susan Stroman,
Oh,
about a
cool.
very, very famous court case of 9 black men who were accused of raping a white woman. And basically, the trial kept going back to trial. It just kept going
Wow.
on and on and on. So, what they did was they reconfigured that entire story as a musical minstrel show. It was a fascinating piece of theater, and just an incredible piece to work on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Was it
a great show.
created from the story itself, or was there a book or something before that?
As far as I know, it was from like
Wow.
historical accounts. There
Yeah.
may have been some books that were part of sort of the underlying property of
Mm-hmm.
it, but from what I understand, it was, they had a number of historical accounts, and then they sort of filled in the
Okay.
pieces.
Wow, that is amazing. So what, I guess, first of all, sort of, how long were you on Broadway and what moved you away from that?
Yeah, so I worked in Broadway from probably about 2008 to 2011, 2012. I think was one of the last times I raised money
Okay.
on a show officially. And I think the thing that really kind of moved me away from it was the fact that when you're raising money as a Broadway producer, it's the same thing kind of over and over and over again. So
Um,
the joke I would make about it would be, it's like you're climbing this tree and it's a real pain in the butt to climb, and you're getting smacked with branches on the way up, and it's just brutal. And you get to the top, and there's this beautiful view. I mean, it's an amazing, wonderful view. But the
Yeah.
second that you're done looking at that view, there's somebody at the bottom of the tree saying, "Hey, you got to come back down and do the whole
Oh,
thing over again."
jeez. Do you have to keep raising for the same show, or you're just raising for the next one at that
Yeah,
point?
exactly. You would just raise for the next one
Wow.
at that point. And sometimes, producers will get to a point where one of their shows has been so successful that really they can spend most of their time just kind of in the world of development, right? They can spend most of their
Okay.
time just doing readings and things like that. But for a lot of Broadway producers, the journey is really raise money, get your name on a show, raise money, get your name on a show, build credibility,
Got it.
eventually become a lead producer if that's what you desire to
Want.
do.
Okay. So you saw that option and said, "Nah, not for me."
Yeah, yeah. I think the thing about me, and I think this is why I do the work that I do, is I'm wired for novelty. I just like after a certain period of time, I'm always thinking, is there a different way to do this? Is there a different angle? Is there a different way to uh, think about this? And when I sort of looked at the trajectory, and I did the same thing when I was looking at teaching, right? The
Mhm.
trajectory, it was the same. It was looking like it was going to be the same thing sort of over and over and over again.
Yep.
And I just did not want to end up in that scenario.
Yeah. Now that makes complete sense. So, what did you? I'm just going to map through this, and then I got some deeper dive
Yeah.
questions for you. But where did you go? Like, did you have a place to go? Did you just say I'm done and then go off on your own? What
Yeah.
sort of happened after that stint?
Yeah. So it moved into originally just consulting in the entertainment space, where there were just a lot of people who they wanted to talk to a producer who had already raised money,
Oh,
right?
cool.
And sort of learn, how do I raise money? How do I get this show off the ground? How do I, so there was a lot of like consulting on sort of the back end of the
Yep.
work that people wanted to do on the producing side. But eventually people started asking me more and more. They're like, how did you even get people to connect with you,
Love
to
it.
write these checks for you and all these different types of things? And the more that people would ask me about that, the more I would start to think about, well, maybe there is
How did
some
I
kind of
do it?
process behind it. Maybe there are some principles. And I was getting my master's at the time in educational theater.
Cool.
And one of the things that I had learned about was simulations, and how even if
Ah,
somebody is just acting out a scenario and simulating a scenario, even though they know they're acting, they often act as they would in real life.
really?
Yeah, yeah, and you see it all the time with simulated experiences where somebody will literally tell you, "Okay, we're going to act out this scenario," but so often you just go off of whatever your instinct is in that sort of believed situation. So I started hosting these workshops where I would simulate these networking experiences, and I'd have
Yeah.
people act out things like one-on-one meetings, job interviews, cocktail parties. And I started to notice that there were these patterns in how people interacted. And I always like to say that patterns are the precursors to frameworks,
I
because I
love that.
saw that.
It's a
Yeah,
great line,
thank
by the
you.
way.
Thank you. So I saw that and I started to say, okay, can I build frameworks around relationship building? And when I started teaching that, it tied to this thing that I've spent a lot of time thinking about over the past couple of years, which is, if you can develop a bigger idea, you basically leave your niche. You stop niching
Ah,
down and you basically niche up, right? Like you turn into this idea or this concept that suddenly an audience doesn't say, "Are you in my industry?" They
yep,
ask, "Does what you do fit my industry?
yep,
Can
yep.
you bring that to my industry?" And what I discovered while I was building out those frameworks was, I was like, well, yes, this works to get into rooms and have conversations with people who want to give you money, but heck,
Could
this
work
process
anywhere.
exactly can work if you are selling something. This process can work if you're trying to find a partner, if you're trying to connect with somebody that you've always thought was influential, and you weren't sure if they'd ever sort of talk to you,
Yep.
right? And when I saw that, I was like, you know what? This
Is
this is
not just
something
for
really
Broadway
interesting.
anymore, right?
Exactly, exactly. And that led to saying, okay, where is the other business use case here?
Yeah. Oh, I love this because one of the things that this hits on so many cylinders because one of the things we all hate, especially first of all, your journey sounds very similar to what happens to those of us who've left corporate. We leave, then we consult with what we already know.
Yep.
And then what you've said that I never put together before is we realize there's a pattern and that pattern becomes a framework and then the framework leads us to something else. I mean, that's a
Yep.
really cool like path I never really put together before. But the thing I particularly like about this is that you didn't didn't hesitate to say networking doesn't have to be the thing we've all learned it was, right?
Yes.
Because everybody could have been immediately turned off. Like, I love the name of your workshop, Access to Anyone, and I'm going to dig into what that's made me think about here in a minute. But
Yeah.
to me, like the word network has a really awful connotation to it.
Yes.
And how have you dealt with that kind of in your business to kind of shake people up and say that's not what this is about?
Yeah. Well, I think that the thing is networking at its heart is presented and taught as climbing a ladder.
Yes.
And climbing a ladder is always geared towards you and it's geared towards what you're trying to accomplish. And it basically puts people in the position where they are, whether or not they want to, whether or not they're interested, whether or not you're interested, they're in a position where they feel used instead of useful,
Huh.
right?
Love that. Yep.
And what I started to think about was it's not about climbing a ladder, it's about spinning a web. And the larger the web that we spin, the easier access becomes because ultimately our access is tied to interest. It's tied to, is somebody interested enough in talking to us for any particular reason? And in some cases, they're interested because a close friend of ours is willing to vouch for us
Mm-hmm.
and say, I want you to meet this particular person. And
Yep.
in other instances, they want to meet us because of an idea or a concept that we've developed that they say that idea or concept is so interesting to me that I want to be around you, that I
Yep.
want to hear the types of things that you have to say. So, what I realized as I was sort of looking through this and I was looking at all the issues that were sort of existing within this sort of networking space, if you spend the time thinking about how are all of the different parts of the web benefiting
Mm-hmm.
from the experiences, then you are going to benefit. You're going to have opportunities that happen for you, but everybody within that circle, they're going to feel useful. They're not going to feel used. They're going to feel like they're part of something and they're a part of helping and supporting. And that's really what we want, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
want a world in which access is not limited to just one industry group of people, etc. We want a world where access is much more open.
And mutually desired.
Exactly. Where we're thinking about sort of what does the other person want. And when I kind of shifted from that into this world of thought leadership, that's when I started to realize like this is really what it comes down to. If we want our ideas to be shared, they
Mm-hmm.
100% have to benefit the people who are sharing the ideas. If we are not thinking about that, if we are not
Mm-hmm.
thinking about how does the thing I share with you benefit you and the people within your world, you're not going to want to share that idea. You're not going to want to spend time talking about it or because it's not benefiting you, it's not helping you. So it's like when we start to see the world through other people's eyes, all of this becomes significantly easier and
Mm-hmm.
the whole sort of access problem really shifts and changes.
Wow, there is so much in that last chunk that you just said. So, I definitely participated in the network events where you stand there and, somebody's looking over your shoulder to see who's in the room that's more important. And I was a CFO in corporate. And when I was employed, everybody lined up to talk to me. And when I was unemployed, I could have been a fly on the wall. And
Yep.
that's how I realized, who was really somebody I wanted to be around. Not because so much, I don't think it was a fault of the people. Now that I've listened to you talk about it, I don't think they were crappy people. I think you're right. Networking was a ladder climbing tool.
Yeah.
And this, you've articulated for me the good side of, I like calling it access as opposed to networking.
Yeah.
That it's a web. Like that's the first time I've had an image I can take away that what is different about what we're doing today. And Know Your Map, it kind of started because I am that geek who literally has a mind map of
Yeah.
everybody who's I've got a meaningful relationship with and where it came from, right? So
Mm,
that's kind of how I do my gratitude every day. I start at one of the ends and work my way back and think about everybody along the chain. Then pick another one the next day.
yeah.
And you have these hub people, of which, frankly, you're one in my map, that have through them, and you probably don't even know all the people I've gotten to know because of you, right? So,
Yeah.
one of the things Michael did, and I just want to share this because I think it's so important. When I first got into entrepreneurship, I didn't know my head from a hole in the ground or my from a hole in the ground. And he had a group on Facebook, still does today, called, give me the name again, I'm drawing a blank,
The gate group.
the
Yes.
Gate Group. I don't actually look at the name anymore. I just look at it. But in that group, there are hashtags you can use for asking help, for giving help, for anything you want to do and interact. And I noticed in that group, it was a little different from every other group in that people participated and it was value that was being offered and asked for. And you taught me that asking for help is okay. You probably don't even
Mm,
know that very early on in this journey of entrepreneurship. And Michael has, like I said, he's always been there in the background. Checks, I'll check in with him and he'll check in with me. This is probably the most we've ever talked
yeah.
in our, 7-year relationship.
I know.
But I always knew and know that it's a meaningful one. And the whole purpose of this podcast, similar to yours, is that network working is not a dirty word. But you have really captured the essence of it in access to anyone.
Thank you.
So one of the things I think there's probably just hearing you articulate that now, I want to come find out how I can do this. Whatever your coaching you're doing now, I want to find
Yeah.
out how I can do it with you because
Sure.
there are things that will be light bulbs, it sounds like,
Yeah.
in the whole process. Um, when you've been going through this, like that move from Broadway to, okay, I'm got to do something here,
Yeah.
right? You were doing the consulting, you were doing things. So clearly, relationships have been key in your evolution as an entrepreneur and beyond.
Yeah.
So, who is kind of the first person after you jumped ship to to really move you forward in the new business? Like I like to talk about the key relationships that have kind of
Yeah.
popped up either by surprise or on purpose.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what can happen is that sometimes we'll sort of get into that channel of whatever industry we're in, right? And we sort of stay within that industry and we sort of stay within that world. And there's not a lot of things that sort of open us up, right?
Hmm.
And sort of shift, that type of dynamic.
Yep.
And I had a friend within the theater world named Ciara Pressler, who really great like marketing mind and sort of helped a lot of people within the theater world. And she would periodically let me know about sort of different events and different things that were going on. And she invited me to a marketing conference, and she brought a bunch of her friends together. And
Hmm.
one of those friends was someone who you've probably met before, is Jeff Madoff. And um,
I think I have.
oh, interesting. So Jeff did pretty much like all of the video production for Victoria's Secret for a number of years. He worked
Oh,
with
wow.
yeah, he worked with Ralph Lauren on his brand Bible.
Okay.
And the most interesting sort of element of like tying to what we're talking about is Jeff hosted a class at Parsons
Okay.
called Creative Careers, where
I
he would
like that.
bring in all of these entrepreneurs from all these different creative backgrounds at
Love it.
very, very high levels. Like really, really interesting folks. Like Tim Ferriss spoke in his class. Like
Wow.
he
Okay.
had, Damon
Big
John, like
guns. Yep.
yeah.
Oh, okay. We're back.
All right. So yeah, so Jeff was hosting, this class, and he had guests like Tim Ferriss and Damon John and all these like really interesting different types of creatives. And
Creatives.
what
Yep.
he did was he basically said to all of us, if you want to come and just sit in on the class, you're welcome to. So I would go every week and sit in on that class. And then if I met somebody who I thought it would be really interesting for Jeff to meet, what I would do is I would say, Jeff hosts this class, and I'd reach out to Jeff and I'd say, hey, can I bring them to your class? And then they would get a
Love
chance
it.
to, hear some really great speakers. Jeff would be able to sort of connect. And Jeff kind of expanded
Yep.
the people that I knew, right? As well as Ciara sort of expanding sort of that community and folks that I knew.
Yep.
And that's what led to meeting a lot of these folks who were in more of that sort of like entrepreneurial space.
Space.
And when
Perfect.
that whole kind of world started, actually that reminds me of a really interesting, like you follow the thread sort of all the way back.
Yes. Yep.
Ciara also introduced me to this guy, Sebastian Marshall, who was, yeah, this
Love the
really
name.
like he was this person who like loved like ideas and thinking. Like every time you like meet with him, he just like ask you like tons of questions about you and like what you were working on. And he was doing some work, I believe, at the time in the not-for-profit space. Like he was helping on the like
Okay.
fundraising kind of side of things. And this was actually my first discovery of the most powerful form of asking. If I go all the way back, this was my first discovery of this, because in my estimation, when we basically ask in a way that encourages somebody else's creativity, we get something that we would never have expected. So at the
Huh.
time, I was experimenting with this type of ask, which I've referred to as the indirect.
Do you have an
Yeah, sure.
example you
So
can give us?
if it were a fundraising
Cool.
scenario, a direct ask is, do you want to invest in this show? It's an indirect ask.
Gotcha.
It's, I'm currently raising money. You have done this before. You've been successful. You've sort of had this, process. Do you have any ideas as to how I could go about raising money for this venture? And in some
Got
cases, they
it.
give you advice. Some cases, they connect you to somebody. You can get introductions or sort of whatever the scenario was. So when I had that meeting with Sebastian, he asked me what most people end up asking you, which is this aspect of, what can I do for you, or how could I be helpful for you? And I said,
Mm-hmm.
I am finding that when I am on larger platforms sharing these ideas, that ends up being the best business sort of opportunity for me. And
Okay.
I'm curious, do you have any ideas of places where I should be focusing that energy? Places where I should be
Love
speaking
it.
about that type of thing? And he said, I really think you should be on my friend Srini's podcast. And that
Huh.
was the Unmistakable Creative, which at the time was a pretty popular show.
Yep.
And I ended up on the show, and then I ended up meeting all of these people through his world. I went to a conference that
Yep.
he hosted, and it just grew and sort of grew from there. And I
There you
think the
go.
thing that it's so important to think about is that we limit the things we get in life when we limit other people's creativity.
God, that's brilliant. I just love that. And like you said, say you had just said, "Will you support my show?" and he'd written you a check. Great, that show would have been supported, but the whole journey would have been cut off right at the knees before it ever
Exactly.
started.
Exactly.
That is a huge takeaway. And I want to re-emphasize kind of what I heard and
Yeah.
tell me if I got it right. But basically is don't when you need help,
Yep.
first of all, we all need help and we give help. We're capable of giving help. When you need help, maybe broaden the question to engage the other person's
Mhm.
creativity. And they might give you what you think you want, but they may very well give you a lot more. And it doesn't, you won't even realize it until
Yeah.
further down the
Yeah.
road.
And I think that the thing that's so interesting is that we believe that we know what we want. But how often,
That's
right?
brilliant.
How
That's,
often do we ask for that thing that we want and we're really not actually getting the thing that we need, or setting up an environment where we can
yep.
get that thing that we really like, that we actually need, because we've already made our assumptions about what it is that we want and what it is that we're looking
Yep.
for and what it is that's going to do it and sort of solve the problem. And I can't tell you the number of times where somebody would turn down an introduction because they didn't see the direct connection to cash, right? They didn't see the
Yep.
correct
Yep.
connection to, like, how is this person going to be a client, when that person had
Yep.
access to an entire audience of people that would have spent way more money on that person than that one individual, but they turned it down because they didn't see it.
Turned it down. And I
Yeah.
think it's interesting because one of the things that I did in corporate in between jobs was literally set up a job to
Hmm.
find a job. And I remember getting some really good advice from an ex boss of mine who said, it's not about applying for jobs. It's not about resumes. Sure, do that stuff if you want to. It's all about adding value, going out to meet people. They didn't call it this, but it's building that web. And sure enough, that was the reality of how to
Hmm.
get a job. That is the reality of how to build your business. That's the reality of how to, you end up making some of the best friends in the world because it takes the
Yeah.
transactional out of it. And and as long as you can do that, I find people find that
Yeah.
very hard though. That if it's not, I've got to go to this conference and I expect to get this many
Yeah.
clients from this conference. No, you expect to build your web, which will get you so many more clients
Yep.
in the long run. Which is it's such a you really drop some gold here. And if that's an example of what's available and that you cover in the your whole program, that is an immense giveaway you've just provided
Thanks.
to us. So
No, no,
golly, thank you.
I appreciate that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is so interesting. And I want to address something that you just brought up. And I think that the thing that we sometimes forget about is that when the wolf's at the door, everybody's interested in a silver bullet, right? And the the
That is so
higher the
true.
level of stress we are in regards to what it is that we need or what it is that we're trying to do, can eliminate a lot of our sophistication in terms of how we're interacting with others, because we're
Yeah,
trying to get
you're right.
that thing as quickly as possible and we're feeling the stress of the need for that
Yep.
thing. So it's so important
Yep.
to periodically check in with yourself and ask yourself, am I being this direct because of the situation that I'm in,
Right.
and is it as dire as I really think it is? Because I think we also sometimes can
Yeah.
create this thing in our minds of how
Yeah.
scary everything is, how bad everything is, how this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work out. And in many cases we end up shooting ourselves in the foot with those relationships because we try to go for something too quickly, and the other person's like,
Yeah.
I don't know you. So
Right.
why are we
Right.
talking about this high level thing or this big thing when I don't really know you yet? I don't really necessarily
Yep.
trust you yet because we haven't spent some time really getting to know each other and understand each other. And yeah, I think that that's a
Right.
big, big piece of it as well.
What I love about that story is that when that tends to happen, when somebody, kind of just comes up and, can you do this? The sort of the cold call out of nowhere thing. I kind of had you've changed me from kind of being a little bit offended by that to, oh, this person's probably under a lot of stress right now, and they're reverting to things that they need to do. Like that, it's not necessarily that it's a bad
Yes.
person, or it's there's a situation probably driving that sort of thing, or they've never had access to any
Yeah.
thought process
Yeah. And
beyond that.
you're
But you
tapping
said,
into something. So sorry to interrupt, but you're tapping into
no,
something that
do.
I think is so, so important. And I think is probably one of the most dangerous lessons within the whole sort of networking teaching is that people will do things like call people an energy vampire. They'll call them takers. They'll call them this like horrible person who's trying to only get. And
Yep.
we do not know what is going on in that person's life. We do not
Yep.
know
Yep.
if they are literally living in fight or flight right now. And that is
Mhm.
informing most of their decisions.
That is such an important take a pause, and it's going to cause me to rethink a little bit because it manifests in so many ways, right? There's that, but you see it in the LinkedIn
Yeah.
cold DMs, and you see it in, and I tend to just go like, oh, well, that's not a person I
Yeah.
want to know. And that may not be true because one of the things you said, I have always found, no matter how much I feel like an outsider in a room or I'm meeting a stranger, like once you take a minute to talk to that person, there is such depth behind each one of us that we just assume when we're passing them
Hmm.
on the street, they're, oh, they're a New Yorker
Yeah.
hurrying to work. No, they've got a whole life happening just like you do. And that is such a really important
Yeah.
reminder to me. I think that's really, really good. So, um, one of the things also that
Yeah.
I really want to get at is probably like every entrepreneur, you've had
Yeah.
a crash, right? Or
Yeah.
like you just described, like the things are, it's like heart, blood to the heart and lungs, everything's caving in on me.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. And you are a real proponent
Yeah.
of asking for help. Did that always come naturally to you? Or did somebody come to your aid at some point when you
Yeah.
didn't ask for it? And
Yeah.
tell me a little bit
So
about that.
I will probably never forget this particular moment. I had gone off on my own. I was rolling down the Broadway producing work, and I was kind of just getting started on the consulting side, and I was selling the networking stuff.
Okay.
And the networking stuff, I
Okay.
hadn't repositioned it very well yet. I hadn't really kind of like gotten it sort of to the place where it needed to be. And the business
Okay.
tanked. Like it got to a point where it was really dire, where there was just no sort of money to be found sort of in any, in any area. And
Ugh.
I will never forget laying on my couch in Hell's Kitchen contemplating sending an email about my situation to the people that I knew, um and thinking about how, like, how much of a loser I felt, like how awful I felt that I didn't, land like it, that I didn't get this thing off the ground, how many people believed I was so successful when I wasn't. And I think, like, there is a real danger, especially with people who are lovely, giving, helping people, to become connection rich and cash poor. And you have to be very, very careful of that.
Well,
You got to be very, very careful.
great point.
So I will never forget sitting down and writing an email where I sent it out to probably like 50 or even 100 of the people that I had met sort of over the years. And I called it I titled the email self assessment. And I
Hmm.
wrote to that group. I said basically, I'm going to be completely honest. I, just had a meeting where I couldn't even pay for the coffee for the meeting. And I am struggling as a business owner. I am not getting the things that I need to make happen. And I am just opening myself up right now. If anybody has any ideas or any thoughts as to what I can do, I am more than willing. If even if you just want to meet me for coffee and and let me cry a little bit,
And
yeah,
pay for it, damn it.
right? It's like, let's, I'm open to anything. And I remember spinning this
Wow.
and thinking, well, that's it, right? Everybody.
That's it. I'm
And then all of a
done.
sudden, my phone just starts pinging, right? And I'm getting these emails back from people being like, oh my God, I had no idea that was going on, this, etc. And then I get a call from one of my producing friends who I had mentored her and sort of helped her, get into the business. And she calls me up and she says, listen, I don't know how much you need to get out of the hole that you need to get out of right now, but I have a friend who works in tech and money is not an issue for him and he wants to produce a reading in the city. I'm going to introduce you and I want you to just tell him what you would charge to produce the reading to cover what you're behind on, and I am sure that he will say yes. She introduces me to the
Wow.
guy, and 2 days later I have like I've got that contract. And I've pulled it,
Wow.
and back from the ashes. And I think I think that the most important thing about that is there are so many people out there who help and support and do so much for everybody else who never take the time to just simply let folks know when things are not going well, when there are challenges and when
Wow.
there are issues. And if you do, it will help you. There are going to be people who are going to
Yeah.
I certainly got a bunch of MLM emails, when I sent that
Oh,
out. I
geez. Yeah.
certainly had
Yeah.
people who wanted to coach me on my mindset and and all this other stuff, right? But the real people
Yep.
in your life, they will see the situation, they will understand, and they will help you.
Yep.
They will support you.
That is a beautiful, beautiful story. And they love
Oh,
to
yeah.
help at that point because you've probably touched or in what I found is generally we've touched or influenced or made a huge difference in a lot of
Oh,
people's
yeah.
lives and we don't even
Oh,
know
yeah.
it. Like there's so many people, like a casual thing you might have said over coffee 3 years ago and it
Yeah.
changed their life or whatever it might be. And they want to give that back. And you said something you said connection
Yeah.
rich and cash poor is such a great line because I think that is true. I've probably been guilty of
Sure.
that myself at times. And I found out recently how important it is every now and then to just say, you know what,
Yeah.
things aren't going well and I need help. And that was probably one of the toughest things I've ever done. Like you remember
Yeah.
exactly where you were. I remember exactly where I was. And it's it's an awesome growth moment because this is where I think karma really
Yeah.
shows itself. And often we have to ask in order for it to show itself. That's the thing that I think is so kind of meaningful about that
Yeah.
story you just
Yeah. And what
shared.
you're bringing
Wow.
up is, I think that again, there's all this teaching of karma and the universe and you just do these things and the good will come to you and it'll all work out. But the thing that is never sort of addressed or talked about is that the universe is on its own timeline, right? Like
Right.
there are things outside of your world that there's a lot of other stuff in the world that depends more than you getting back
Yep.
something that you sent around. So you need to make sure that people are aware of what's going on, where you are, what it is
Right.
that you need, what it is that you can use.
So they can turn their head and go, "Oh, okay, let me help. I would never have looked over here to
Exactly.
help if I had known."
Exactly.
That's
I mean,
beautiful.
yeah, it's so powerful. And I mean, I remember reading, Robert Cialdini's influence, which, a lot of folks, know very well. And I tend to remember like certain moments in books at certain times. And the one part of that book that just like really landed was this idea of um, if you are having a heart attack in a crowd, don't shout into the crowd, point to a person and say, "You, I need help." Right?
Yep. Yep. And then they'll do it. The crowd won't do anything. They'll stand there looking. But if you identify somebody and say, do this, they'll
Exactly.
engage.
Exactly. And I think that that's the thing. It's like we sometimes assume that if we just sort of post something or put something out there, and this ties to a lot of the stuff that happens in thought leadership as well, where it's like if I just sort of shout it to the crowd, then it's
Yep.
going to bring me business. And really what we shouldn't be thinking, should I shout to the crowd? It should be, should I whisper to the person who needs it most?
That's just beautiful. All right. So I am absolutely in love with
Thank
your
you.
pedagogy here. The way you talk, the way you
Yeah.
teach. So I need to know for myself and for these listeners who I've forgotten all about right now, quite honestly. Just kidding, guys. I love you. But this is like, I feel like this is, as I saw Mel Robbins say recently in an interview of hers, this is, I feel like I've just gotten a
Oh,
personal coaching session, which is beautiful. But I want to know, how
sure.
do you work with people? And what does that look like? And how could somebody
Yeah,
get more
sure.
information on that? Because I want to know more. I'm sure that
Yeah.
our listeners do too.
So I run a mastermind every usually every couple of months, roughly every quarter, called Hitmakers, where I bring subject matter experts together and I have them stress test those big ideas that they have and figure out like what is the bigger idea, what's the thing that's going to get them kind of beyond their niche. And then we look at how do we package it up, how do we share those ideas and get those things out there, and also how do you engage that web, right? Like how do you sort of leverage that network to help you and support you. um, and then I also
Yeah.
do this work one-on-one, where I really dig into the thought leadership piece, and how it ties to where you're kind of investing your time and your energy. So I'm always kind of looking at, okay, if you're coming up with an idea or a concept, are you actually tapping into that network? Are you asking people for the things that you need? Are you threading those, communities together and sort of developing those types of opportunities? So I do some of that work in sort of short one-on-one intensives as well. Yeah.
Love that. Okay, cool. And how do
Yep.
people reach out to you? We're going to
Sure.
drop all of this in the notes, guys, be it
Yeah.
YouTube or podcast. So you'll have access to this. But how do people
Yeah.
get
So
get started with
one of
you?
the best ways is I've got a tool. It's just at myreferabilityrater.com. And people can take a
Ooh, I love
test to see
that.
sort of how referable they are. It'll tell you sort of what it is. Then they
Ooh.
can get on. I write a daily email about these concepts, and basically they can get on my daily email. I'm also very, very accessible myself on LinkedIn, on the Book of Faces.
Yep.
All those different sort of channels.
That I can
Yeah,
vouch for. I've never sent a note or an email or DM to Michael that I haven't, or a comment on a post that he hasn't jumped in on. And so inside these different options, either the mastermind that you run. Now, is that a short term
yeah,
mastermind, or does
yeah.
it
For
last a
Hitmakers,
long time? How does
Hitmakers is
that?
a 12-week, so it's kind of medium length.
Okay.
It's not a year-long program or anything. But it's enough of a time to basically be able to go out and test things in the market, right, and see what's working.
Yep. Yep. I love this. And the one-on-one work, they
Mhm.
could find you for that as well. And you could probably focus that on the thing they want to do the most. I guess
Yeah,
I absolutely am thrilled. So myreferabilityfinder.com. We will drop that in the notes. I'm going to
yeah.
probably ping on it today. Not probably. I'm going to ping on it today because that's a fascinating question. Great
Thank
lead
you.
magnet, by the way.
And
I
it's
really,
just
really like
a
that.
just a
And
quick clarification. It's my referability rater .com. I don't know
not
where
radar,
what finder would
rater.
send you to.
My refer I actually said radar, but my
Yes.
referability rater.com. rater.com. I know people are going to be clicking on that when they're listening. And then get on the daily email list. Now, I've always followed you on Facebook, but I really look forward to actually having you
Oh,
in my
thank you.
inbox every day. And I can't wait to see what other wisdom lies there. So you know how fond I am of you and what you've done around me. And this is a very perfect example of what it is to weave that web, because we've been on each other's sort of
Yeah.
outer orbits for a long time. And we said, hey, I'd love to have you on my Know Your Map podcast, because I really think they intersect
Yeah.
what we're talking about. And now I'm ready to say, okay, hey, wow, I think there's something here that I could do some help with. And so it's a beautiful example, a nice meta example of what you're
Thank
talking about
you.
in
I so
action.
appreciate it. And I appreciate you having me.
Very,
This is a
very cool.
blast. Yeah.
Oh, I love having you. I'm so glad you came. It's you're the perfect guest for this show, and I can't thank you enough for taking the
Thank
time to be
you.
on with us. All right, everybody, you know how to reach Michael. You know you can find him on any of the socials. Trust me, I'm in there in the groups that he runs. So hop in and follow up, because as you can tell from this podcast, there's a lot of gold to be mined here. And it's all in learning about the thing that's most important to me on this show, which is know your map and understand how this all works to elevate your business and your life. So welcome again, Michael. Thank you. And I'll see everybody next week on our next Cash Flow podcast. Take care. Thanks so much for watching the Cash Flow podcast with us. We want to bring more and more of this to you, so please like, share, subscribe, comment, so that we can keep bringing more of this content to you.